Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we have Suzi Quatro, and this is going to be coming from 1979, and she's going to be playing through the Tom Petty classic Breakdown. So let's get Suzi up on screen and see how she gets on.
It's alright if you love me. It's alright if you don't. I'm not afraid of you running away, honey. I get the feeling you won't. There's no sense in pretending. Your eyes give you away. Something inside you is feeling like I do. We said all there is to say. Oh, baby, break down. Go ahead, give it to me. Break down, honey, take me to the night. Break down, I'm standing in your chaos. Break down, it's alright. It's alright. It's alright. It's alright if you love me. It's alright if you don't. I'm not afraid of you running away, honey. I get the feeling you won't. Oh, baby, break down. Go ahead, give it to me. Break down, honey, take me to the night. Break down, I'm standing in your case. Break down, it's alright. It's alright.
And there we have it. So, just breaking this down, something that I want to mention straight off the bat is Suzi's bass playing. Because when you're watching her perform live, and especially when we get a camera shot just of her face, you sometimes forget the solidity and the accuracy of her playing on the bass, absolutely keeping everything solid. And especially with this track, we've got that swing in there as well. So really locking in that bass as well as singing. I always say playing and singing at the same time doubles the difficulty. And it is no exception here with Suzi. And she was one of those through and through musicians, and still is one of those through and through musicians, where you sometimes lose track, because she makes it look so easy, the amount that she's actually doing in terms of the timing on the bass with that swing, but then we've also got the vocal melody, which isn't going to fit into that same pocket of groove, because sometimes those vocal lines will actually go against what you might be playing. And that goes for guitar and pretty much every instrument if you're listening to somebody who's supplying vocals as well. I did a video on Joan Jett last night, and Suzi would have been one of those acts and one of those artists artist that certainly would have influenced Joan with her approach to playing guitar and singing. And Suzi, of course, is about 8 years older than Joan, so Suzi's very much the first on the scene. And to have a band that is fronted by a woman, especially back, we're talking 1979 in this particular performance, it was very much a male-orientated gig in terms of being a rock band or a hard rock band and having the big hair and also glam rock as well. It was always fronted by male singers, and Suzi was one of those that just came along and not only supplied that lead vocal but was also a talented musician in her own right. But this sound being so dry, guitars are pretty dry, all the vocals are really dry, so you can imagine this just in an arena with lots of reverb, maybe a light show going off, because it's a real top quality performance. And the other thing about Suzi vocally is that she has that dynamic range that I mentioned about being able to have a talking quality in her voice, but then also really pushing into her chest voice when she's getting into the choruses, like shouting almost. And this is the appeal of Suzi in terms of having that attitude. Another thing that I mentioned on last night's video, just having that delivery of the song. I know that this is a Tom Petty track, but she's absolutely nailing the expression vocally. Another thing that hasn't been overlooked by Suzi is the showmanship side of it, because you will see a lot of bands that just look disinterested when they're playing and they don't put on a show at all, whereas when we do get over to the guitars here, Suzi then struts around on stage and she puts on that show. And that's what you want from not only a front woman, but just a front person, a front man. It doesn't matter. You want that entertainment, and Suzi certainly brings that to the table. Suzi and the band here have absolutely nowhere to hide. So because it's such a dry sound, in order to pull this off live to this level, you've got to be top musicians. And of course, Suzi's got to be an absolutely top bass player and singer in order to pull it off live, as they're absolutely doing here. So there is no luxury, no safety net of effect here. It just is plug in and play. And I just want to talk about Suzi in terms of how she wanted to be perceived as an artist, because in 1970 we had the untimely death of Janis Joplin, and a lot of record labels in the 70s were looking for another female who could front a band who could be the next Janis. And Suzi was on the radar of Elektra Records in the 70s, and the president of Elektra Records said that Suzi Quatro could be the next Janis Joplin. But of course, Suzi didn't want that. She wanted to be her own artist, and this is where she then made the decision to go with Mickie Most and went over to the UK, because Mickie said that Suzi could be the first Suzi Quatro, and that just really does sum it up for me, that she was just a unique artist, and that's what she wanted to be. She didn't want to follow in anybody else's footsteps. And just a quick word on her surname as well, Quattro, because her paternal grandfather moved over to the USA from Italy as an immigrant, and the immigration authority changed his second name. It was Quattrochi, and they actually shortened it to Quattro. So that's where Suzi's name came from. It was just an abbreviation of an original name that was then officially by law, and the authorities were now known as Quattro. And one of Suzi's sisters, called Patty, was in a band called Fanny, and they were one of the first all-female bands to get any kind of recognition and exposure in the USA. I actually did a video on them, but it got blocked on copyrights actually a few weeks after I released it by the German TV company, who just disallowed use of the footage, which was annoying because it wasn't even the copyrights of the song they were playing. And it's actually doubly annoying because June Millington, who was actually in the band, commented on the video and was interacting with people in the comment section. We're having some really cool musical stuff going on, but then the whole copyright thing just stopped all of that in its tracks, which is a real shame. She's also said that she didn't really have any female role models in terms of musicians when she's growing up to watch. She just watched Elvis and was really inspired by him, and also Billie Holiday. And it wasn't a case of thinking of them as men, they were just musicians up there, and that's how Suzi saw it. So she very much took a lot from watching frontmen of bands and just copying what they were doing. And she actually started on piano, had some formal training on that, and percussion as well. But then when she was 14, her dad bought her a 1957 Fender precision bass guitar, and Suzi taught herself how to play it. And Suzi's first single that was called Rolling Stone, when that was released, it wasn't a big hit. It just went down really well in Portugal, where it got to #1. And then in 1972, she embarked on a support tour with Thin Lizzy and Slade, and that was in the UK. So she was certainly getting her name around in the United Kingdom. And a year after that, 1973, is when she had her big breakthrough of Can the Can. And that got to #1 in multiple countries in Europe, but also got to #1 in Australia, and she was supporting Alice Cooper on his tour as well, so she started to get a lot more traction from that. And you think that everything was going great, but then for the next 4 years, Suzi didn't have any more big hits. She just kept on plugging away, and in 1978 is when she then released her duet track, and that was called Stumbling In, and that actually got to #4 in the USA, so that was a breakthrough again for that American market, because Suzi wasn't really big in the United States. And in 1980 she released her Rock Hard album, and that went platinum in Australia. And when we then got into the 80s, Suzi started to explore the acting a little bit more. Again, another parallel that we can draw with Joan Jett that I did last night, in terms of getting into that acting world and getting exposure for her as an actress, but as well as a musician. And Suzi's still been writing and recording and performing since the 80s. And even this year, 2019, she's released No Soul, No Control. So always going, and she is a true artist. She's not releasing music for the sales, not for the industry side of it, not to make money, but just for the enjoyment and for the connection with an audience, and just a through and through musician. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!